I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. Though the year began with a banking crisis and has been marked with layoffs and restructurings, we've managed to avoid a feared recession. It's been a big year for new drug approvals, M&A activity has been brisk, and biotech stocks have rallied in recent weeks, pushing the widely watched S&P Biotech Index into positive territory for the year. We continue our annual tradition to look back across the year in biotech and head to JPMorgan and beyond with Adam Feuerstein, Polk award-winning journalist and senior biotech writer for Stat. We spoke to Feuerstein about the biotech news that shaped 2023, the year's best and worst CEOs, and what's ahead in 2024. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Danny Levine, good to be here. As always, year after year, we do this call. Well, I guess it is a call, but we do this interview about the year that was. And the year that will be.
We're going to discuss the good, bad, and ugly of 2023, what's ahead in the new year. And the year appears to be ending on strength. Some big approvals, including the first CRISPR gene editing therapy. The XBI looks like it's going to close in positive territory with a modest year-over-year gain. And the Fed is expecting to cut interest rates 3 times in the new year, setting the stage for an upbeat JPMorgan meeting.
Right.
It's hard to remember, but early in 2023, there was a lot of hand-wringing over the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and fears about it having a devastating effect on biotech and triggering a much broader banking crisis. What kind of year was 2023?
You know, it's interesting, right? If you just look at the chart of the XBI, which is the stock index, that the biotech stock index that we all sort of look at the most, it really is kind of crazy up and down. You know, it was sort of went up in the beginning of the year, it went down, it went up, like sort of the middle of the year, it looked like we were rallying, and then there was this long decline, and it looked like the world was ending into the fall, and now we've had this this furious rally, like you mentioned. Towards the end of the year. And so it looks like, it's not like a great year necessarily, but certainly I think the index was down like 20 something percent, kind of in October. And now it looks like it's going to close up just a little bit, 3% or so. It's been a kind of an up and down crazy year.
While there's reason to be upbeat about 2024, we still saw a lot of layoffs in 2023 and restructurings within the biotech sector. We've now got hundreds of biotech microcaps with less than a year of runway based on their cash burns. Some of these companies do have promising technology. How do you see this shaking out?
Yeah, it is one of the more unfortunate sides of this year for biotech. And I'm talking, mostly from the employee standpoint, right? I think there are a lot of people out there who have been laid off. Companies have been restructuring, cutting programs, having to, as you said, cut expenses because they look ahead and they see, the cash that they have raised running out, and they've had to figure out how to make that last longer. So, I think the workforce within biotech has suffered, and you hear, we've done some stories about, people who have been looking for jobs. And, if you think back a few years ago, it was very much kind of a, it was, people could maybe, just sort of take their pick of jobs, and there was offers all over the table, and it was really easy to find something. That's not the case now. Right now, I think there's lots of people, there's maybe dozens or so of people applying or competing for every job out there. So that's one of the unfortunate sides. But I think on the other side, when you sort of step back from a macro perspective, I've been one who has said, there are just too many. There's too many biotech companies out there. When the money spigot was kind of turned on full blast, you had lots of companies being funded. It was really easy to raise capital. And so you had all these companies coming to the market, whether first as private companies and then maybe going public, and that maybe, on second thought, probably should not have been companies unto themselves. And now we're so we're seeing sort of the downside of that, like you mentioned. We're seeing a lot of we're seeing a lot of restructuring, these companies going out of business, or maybe they're reverse merging into other companies. I think we'll probably see more of that next year, Danny. I think we're sort of on the sort of trailing edge of that, and maybe it will depend on sort of how much the money spigot turns back on in 2024, as you mentioned. From a macro perspective, the Fed signaling that they're going to be cutting interest rates in 2024 does signal, maybe a loosening of the financial constraints that we've seen that have sort of played a big part in this year. And so maybe money will be easier to find in 2024. But, I don't know. The companies out there that are still hurting for cash, we'll see what happens to them.
Biotech executives generally don't become part of the popular imagination. This year, we saw Roivant Sciences founder Vivek Ramaswamy rise to national prominence. What do you make of Ramaswamy and his move from biotech to politics?
Oh, Danny, you wanted to go there? I don't know. I try not to get into the politics stuff just because I don't know. It's boring. I guess what I would say about him is, I think he's, his platform is kind of totally divorced from his biotech experience. I mean, he sort of, when you see him described places or in print or in stories, he's described as kind of an entrepreneur or a biotech entrepreneur. I don't know if sort of 90% of the people out there know what that means. Obviously we do because we live and breathe this stuff. But I don't know. I don't think he's going to get the nomination. He's trying hard. But maybe he's vying. Maybe he's really vying for a cabinet post.
Oh, there's always NIH,
right? I've known him for a long time, and so some of the things that come out of his mouth these days certainly do surprise me. But yeah, we'll leave it at that.
You did have praise for Roivant CEO Matt Glein, who was a runner-up in your annual Best CEO this year. Roivant had a blockbuster deal with Roche, which brought Telavant and its experimental IBD drug for $7.1 billion. Why Glein, and what does the deal mean for Roivant?
Yeah, so he was a runner-up in my Best Biopharma CEO column that I put out actually this week. And he's just a great deal, right? I mean, they had managed to get this drug from out of Pfizer, paid very little for it, like $50 million, and then spun it out and sold it for $5 billion. So that's in basically a year. So that's a pretty good return on investment. I think we talk about Vivek and whether how tied Vivek is to Roivant these days. I think Matt Glein has tried to sort of make the point that yes, Vivek owns he owns stock. Obviously, he still owns stock in Roivant, but he's not involved operationally in the company. So they're sort of independent from that. But yeah, he did a really nice job this year, and so he was a runner-up on my Best Biopharma list. The winner was pretty easy choice to make this year was David Ricks of Eli Lilly. Just GLP-1, right? Obesity. I mean, it's like kind of the only thing that we were talking about this year. And Lilly, between that and their the work that they've done there, and then obviously Alzheimer's as well. It was a phenomenal year for Eli Lilly, and so David Ricks, hands down, it was pretty easy to name him Best Biopharma CEO.
It was also a good year for new drug approvals. There were 55 and counting, as we're about a week away from the end of the year. That's far more than the 37 approved in 2023. On the biologics side, we saw the approval of 2 cell therapies for sickle cell disease, Vertex's Casgevy, and the first CRISPR gene editing therapy, and Bluebird Bio's Lyfgenia. Let's start with Casgevy, the first CRISPR therapy. How significant a moment is this?
Big, huge. We spent a lot of time towards the end of the year writing about that. Both myself and other stat reporters here. It's certainly groundbreaking, right? As you mentioned, the first medicine based on the CRISPR gene editing technology to win approval in an inherited disease. I think it really just sort of usher in this new era of genetic medicines, based on CRISPR and all of its variants, right? We have lots of companies out there who are sort of looking at different types of CRISPRing. You've got different kinds of gene editing that are being explored for diseases. So, it was definitely a one of those sort of really landmark approvals that you can sort of look at and maybe a turning point. Now, I think the open question is just how commercially successful Casgevy will be. Just the difficulties of making it and of administering it and preparing people with sickle cell for this treatment. That's a challenge, and one of the things I am eager to see in 2024 is just to see what kind of uptake that has Casgevy has within the sickle cell community.
Well, let's talk about Bluebird. It had its worst trading day in its history on the news as it fell more than 40% on the approval. The approval came with a black box warning, and the company priced its therapy at $3.1 million, well above the $2.2 million for Casgevy.
Right.
What went wrong for Bluebird, and what's ahead for the company from here?
I think with Bluebird, all kudos to them for getting Lyfgenia, their gene therapy for sickle cell approved. And if you sort of step back, they now have 3 gene therapies approved, which is pretty remarkable if you think about it. That's quite an achievement. It's not easy to get these things approved. And again, the question becomes, can they compete against Vertex and CRISPR, in the sickle cell market? And they're sort of handicapped by the weak balance sheet, the weak financial position of the company, which is kind of a legacy thing that they've had to deal with ever since they sort of split off into 2 companies. The original Bluebird was doing cancer CAR T and gene therapy, and those 2 companies split, and so then sort of the gene therapy focused company, which remains Bluebird, sort of started that life as kind of a weakened company from a financial standpoint, and they have it's been difficult for them to raise money, and as you mentioned, they priced Lyfgenia higher, just under $1 million more than Vertex's. I think that was a misjudgment on their point. I think they probably assumed or thought that Vertex, which is not actually known for discounting any of their drugs, and that company that's sort of known for being aggressive with the pricing of their cystic fibrosis drugs, maybe Bluebird thought that Vertex would do the same with Casgevy, but they did not. So that sort of out of the bat, right off the sort of bat, that was a problem. But I think the bigger problem is just can Bluebird sort of generate revenue and make Lyfgenia into a profitable business before their cash runs out? And I think there's significant concerns about that, which is kind of why the company has suffered a little bit from a stock price perspective, on what should have been obviously very good news, right? Getting this gene therapy approved.
Well, they just did raise, I think, about $120 million.
They did. Yeah, but again, they raised a bunch of money, $125 million, but at a price about the stock price went down about 50% from when they announced that deal. They were doing that deal, so which kind of just shows you how they have no leverage in the market, right? Everybody knows that they're desperate to raise money, so they had to raise money at a significant discount, and that just kind of shows
it was less than they had sought to.
Yeah, and right. I think they were looking to raise 150 and they raised 125. So again, it just shows you, the market kind of knows that investors know that these guys needed money, desperately needed money. So the terms were not great.
A moment ago, you were talking about David Ricks and Eli Lilly. Wegovy won approval in 2021, but the excitement over GLP-1 agonist appears to be growing. What are we learning about these drugs, and are we going to start putting them in the water supply?
Man, they do everything. Yeah.
What's 2024 looking like for GLP-1 drugs?
Yeah. I mean, Zepbound, which is, Lilly's latest, was just approved right towards the end of the year. And, now we're sort of waiting to see, oral, whether the successful development of an oral, these are all injectable right now. And so the oral versions and what those look like. And then other, are we going to see these things expand into sort of other, I don't want to call them diseases because it's like, I guess, there's obesity disease, I guess, but into other areas, whether it's sort of addiction or, you're seeing all these stories and reports and studies saying that these drugs sort of modify other behaviors. And so I think it's there's an insatiable interest and demand for these drugs, these GLP-1 drugs and some of the other sort of related compounds that hit other receptors. At some point, and maybe it's next year where we're going to start sort of, it'll be interesting to sort of see how it sort of runs up into, patient access, pricing. These drugs are not cheap and, potentially millions and millions of people could be eligible for these GLP-1 drugs and sort of how insurance companies deal with that flood of customers, patients who want them, and whether access gets restricted or not. I mean, these are all, the numbers are just staggering, right? I mean, people talk about the GLP-1 class being like $100 billion, and that's a huge, huge number. So we'll see.
In 2023, we also saw the first ALS drug designed to address a specific mutation approved. Leqembi, the Eisai's Alzheimer's drug, also got a full approval.
Right.
The first drug to show a reduction in the rate of disease progression and slow cognitive and functional decline in people with Alzheimer's disease. Neurodegenerative diseases have been an area of challenge. Where do you see us on the neurodegenerative disease drug development front, and how much tension is there between the FDA and the industry on what it takes for an approval, or I should say patients?
Yeah. And let me just say, I have a cold, so that's why I sound the way I do. Just want to put that out there. I've got a cold.
But when are we going to cure the common cold?
I'd take something right now. Again, this is not COVID related. This is just your run of the mill cold that I have right now, which is why I sound crazy nasal. Sarepta, right? Elevidys, their gene therapy for Duchenne, got a controversial accelerated approval. The confirmatory study came out and it failed. Danny, Sarepta just filed those confirmatory data with the FDA, and not only does Sarepta want their gene therapy to get full approval, but they want to actually expand the label to include boys with DMD of all ages, and whether or not they are in a wheelchair or not, because it's approved now only for boys who are ambulatory. They want a non-ambulatory label as well. They seem to have a charmed life when it comes to the FDA. The FDA seems to give them anything that they want. Peter Marks, in the CBER division of FDA, seems to love Sarepta. And so we'll see what the FDA does there. I think there is this feeling, maybe it's just confusion. What you ask, like, what does the FDA want, or what does it take to get these drugs approved? There are people out there who think that what's good for Sarepta is not necessarily good for everybody else, and maybe we need more consistency when it comes to sort of regulatory standards for these drugs. But that's a review. The Sarepta one is, we should know. I imagine the FDA is going to act on that one relatively quickly. So, first half of the year, we'll certainly have an answer for that one.
Well, not just consistency, but I'd argue what people would like to see is the FDA honor precedents and not have this variation between division and division.
Right. Yeah, I think, it's really interesting. And I have actually given this some thought of thinking about this, because I think that is one of the frustrations, is that I think we sort of think of the FDA, some people think of the FDA as sort of this monolithic agency, right? but it's really not, right? It's like these little fiefdoms, right? And it's depending on the division director and how they feel and what their philosophy is, and so there's not necessarily consistency across the divisions within the FDA, and so that makes it difficult sometimes to handicap decisions, and probably makes it difficult for companies to sort of know, what's necessary, what do they need to get a drug approved. Some divisions are harder than others. Some are easy, some are hard, and that's maybe frustrating for people.
So Pfizer was a superstar during COVID times. Albert Bourla of Pfizer took this year's dishonors as the worst CEO.
Yes.
Why Bourla?
It's just a bad year for. It was just a bad year for Pfizer. You mentioned, right? I mean, they had a great COVID. Right? Hey, we had a great COVID. Obviously between the vaccine and the drug to treat COVID that they have, Paxlovid, they were generating tons of sales, and then obviously those fell off. And it's not like that wasn't unexpected, right? Everyone knew that there was going to be a COVID drop off in Pfizer sales. That was not a surprise. I think what was a surprise to people was the way how badly Pfizer handled it in terms of their guidance. They really, the sales just dropped off way more than Pfizer anticipated, at least, what they gave in terms of guidance publicly. And then there were other, they had other clinical setbacks. We talked about GLP-1. They've been having a hard time developing their own GLP-1 drug. They had a setback this year with an oral candidate. I mentioned that Roivant deal, which got Matt Glein is on the best list. That was a drug that was in Pfizer's pipeline that they seem to have kind of given away. So I think for all of those reasons, and the fact that the stock just really kind of tanked this year, was down like 50%. Yeah, I mean, it was sort of the bookend, or the sort of the counterparty to David Ricks. It was just like, yeah, Albert Bourla, sorry, dude, I like you, but you're the worst biopharma CEO of the year.
It was an up year for M&A. We've seen roughly a doubling in the value of transactions in 2023. One notable presence this year has been the FTC, first delaying the Amgen Horizon deal announced at the end of 2022, and then its actions leading to Sanofi terminating its planned acquisition of Maze, and Illumina is divesting itself of Grail. Does this reflect greater scrutiny and a change in posture for the agency, or do you think they're unto themselves, these different?
I mean, it seems to. I mean, I think people are worried about it, that the FTC has become much more activist, and they're taking a really close look, particularly in the pharmaceutical industry. The Sanofi Maze deal that you mentioned, was not an acquisition, right? It was, what Sanofi was licensed. That was a licensing deal for Maze drug in Pompe disease that they intervened in, and then Sanofi backed off, basically terminated that partnership. I think that got a lot of people's attention, because you normally think of the FTC stepping in for acquisitions and not for partnerships, and obviously partnerships are kind of the lifeblood of biotech, right? I mean, that's what if you're a small biotech company, the way you raise money, and the way you sort of you raise money and you sort of advance programs by licensing them out to larger pharmaceutical companies. And so this is seemingly maybe we don't know if this is going to be sort of a widespread issue, but people are certainly paying attention to it. Like I said, we mentioned again, the day we're recording this, Danny, I mean, there was the deal this morning for Bristol buying Karuna, $14 billion. And, there was another deal, Cerevel, which also has, again, in neuroscience space, drugs for schizophrenia, that was bought by AbbVie a few weeks ago. So we'll see whether the FTC steps in there. But yeah, I think it's something that's on a lot of people's mind. And whether or not, I don't know if it doesn't seem like it's really stopped deals from happening, right? As you mentioned, I mean, this was a great year for M&A. I mean, it was, well over $100 billion in deals this year. I mean, I think what was interesting this year about it is that we often tie the success of the sector to M&A activity. And fantastic M&A year, but yet, sort of the broader, it really didn't have an impact on stocks more broadly, right? I mean, like I said, we were down, the sector was down most of the year, badly, right? So, that it was sort of divorced. Those two things were sort of divorced this year, which was kind of interesting.
So if hotel prices are any indication, it should be a big year for JPMorgan in San Francisco. It might be cheaper to sign a lease right now in Union Square for retail space and sleep there.
Yeah, we should all stay in abandoned retail storefronts in Union Square.
Well, what are you expecting this year? I mean, it seems like we're going to, unlike what I would have said in October, it looks like we're heading for a pretty upbeat conference.
So, Danny, you telling me you live over there, right? You live in the Bay Area. What am I expecting when I fly into San Francisco in a couple of weeks? I mean, is it a war zone, or am I going to be okay? You tell me.
It's a beautiful city.
It is a beautiful city. I lived there for a long time, so I loved it. But from what am I expecting? I think, given what's happened over the last few weeks, I mean, the mood should be a lot brighter, right? People should be smiling, and so I think that there'll be some optimism going into JPMorgan this year. It's always hard to remember like what it was the years prior, because it's all become such a blur. But last year was I think people were pretty downbeat going into it, and then the weather last year was horrible. If you remember, I think it rained every day that we were out there. So, can you guarantee me some sunshine this year, Danny?
No guarantees.
Please. Yeah. I want nice weather, please.
I guarantee fog.
I got plenty of bad weather at home here in Boston. I don't need that. I need warm, nice weather. So come on, deliver for me.
What are you going to be watching at JPMorgan this year, and what questions do you hope to answer?
I think a few things. I think one. I'm interested in. Like I said, I think I'm interested in sort of the business of gene therapy. That's what I mentioned before, and kind of what that looks like. Related to sort of the GLP-1 obesity thing is, we should see the first drug approved for MASH at the M. Now, it used to be NASH with an N. Now it's MASH with an M, which is the fatty liver disease.
It's a long time.
Yeah, Madrigal Pharmaceuticals, their PDUFA date I think is in March, and that should be the first MASH drug approved. Now, they've been under the gun a little bit because so many people feel like the GLP-1 drugs are, really kind of invading that area, right? People who have fatty liver disease are also obese, and so would you just treat them with a GLP-1? And do we need these drugs which are more directed at the liver? Proponents of them say absolutely, because the hallmark of MASH, I keep MASH, NASH, I get them mixed up, is liver fibrosis is the kind of the thing that really damages, is the damaging symptom in these patients, and so far GLP-1s don't really impact liver fibrosis. So I think that's one kind of thing. I'm going to sit down with Madrigal when I'm out there. I'm kind of curious sort of how they see the market and how they're preparing for that drug launch, assuming that they get approval.
And you're actually going to be interviewing Peter Marks at
I am
JPMorgan. This is Stat at JPM. What's next in biotech? This is
it's a good one.
Well, this is Monday, January 8th, from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. and people can register on the site. Do you have to be a subscriber? Is this open to everyone?
No, yeah, you can. Yeah, you can just register. We do an event. We usually do an event at JPMorgan on the Monday of JPMorgan, and this year, thanks for the plug, Danny. Appreciate that. I'm doing a one-on-one fireside chat with Peter Marks. As I mentioned, the CBER boss. I have called him the most important and most controversial drug regulator in the world. I think that's an accurate description. And so, he and I are going to sit on stage and we're going to chat. It should be a really great conversation. I get to ask him all kinds of questions, and he'll probably not want to answer any of them. But I will try to get answers out of him. If you can go to the Stat website and find under our events tab, and you can sign up for that.
Yeah, I've got it open on my page, and I'm going to do that when we're done. And what about the year ahead beyond JPMorgan? What are you going to be watching for, and what do you think will be the most compelling stories?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of the things that we've just mentioned, right? From a macro, if we kind of sort of go big picture, right? It's just really, what the Fed ends up doing in 2024, and whether interest rates are lowered and sort of the impact that will have. I mean, the sector was so impacted by rising interest rates this year that we'll see what lower interest rates do, and whether that opens the IPO window, for instance, right? Which I know a lot of people sort of look at as a measure of the health in the biotech sector. And so whether that opens up, and whether just sort of financing in general opens up, whether companies can get access to capital easier this year. And, again, I think the sort of the M&A trends that we're seeing here at the end of the year, which is just really active, you've always, what is the story you always hear year after year, right? Big pharma needs new drugs to replace revenue lost by, their old drugs that are going off patent. And, we're seeing a lot of that at the end of this year. So we'll see how that, how that develops, and whether that just continues into 2024. I mean, people are like, people are now worried about JP. Like, you always want to see big deals announced the week of JPMorgan, and we've had a bunch of these things happen now and the end of December, and so people are like, well, does that mean we're not going to get anything at JPMorgan? So we'll see.
Adam Feuerstein, Polk award-winning journalist and senior biotech writer for Stat. Adam, thanks as always.
And a guy with a cold. Danny, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.